Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover. And today we're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Day, a day in which we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King and the incredible work that he did for us. I am honored tonight to have with me a good friend, Joan Mooney, who's president and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute. Joan, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us about the Faith and Politics Institute and the incredible work that you do every day.
So about 30 years ago, the Faith and Politics Institute was founded to be an interfaith community on Capitol Hill to bring members of Congress and other political leaders together across divides of political party, race, religion, region of the country. We think we are bridging divides that arise in a thriving democracy. Over 300 members of Congress have been engaged and involved in our work, 3 U.S. presidents, multiple people in the diplomatic corps. And so for us, we do our work through small weekly and bi-weekly reflection groups, monthly forums, and biannual pilgrimages that take members of Congress and other political leaders to visit sites in history, to hear the stories and to learn things about them.
So your organization is one at a time when our country can seem so divided. Your organization is really working to bring people together, it sounds like.
We're one of the few organizations in Washington that's bringing members of Congress and their senior staff together across political divides, not based on policy, but really based on getting to know one another. So just like in our communities, how we have become so polarized as a nation, it's not unusual for members of Congress. They are divided by political party. They represent different regions of the country. They come from different types of backgrounds, but they do have an interest in our democracy. And democracy is a conversation. You cannot govern effectively unless you work with everybody, unless you listen and stay open and open-minded. And so for us, when we work with members, we're looking at that that division that is so prevalent. We hear about hyper-partisanship and polarization throughout the nation. And really, members experience it just like people do out in the world. In fact, we've come to learn it as it's our #1 national security threat, according to the Chicago Council, who polled 600 foreign policy and defense experts from throughout the nation. This issue is as big as concerns about Russia or China or North Korea, because if we're not united as a country, we can't face threats from abroad if we're divided from within.
Well, it's interesting because I know that we both have spent time working on Capitol Hill, and the environment has changed so much just in the past 3 decades that the Faith and Politics Institute has been at work. Tell us a little bit about how that environment has changed and what role the Institute can play in continuing that conversation about democracy.
Well, I think the nation has changed. So we're in an instant news cycle. We have tweets coming out and people are chasing the comment in the moment. That makes us more reactive, less responsive, when thoughtful, rational responses would require more information, etc. So it puts members of Congress and their staff in a place where they have to respond instantly to things that might require some more information. Also, I think that members of Congress used to live in Washington, D.C., and their families, their kids went to school together and they'd go home over the weekends or over a long recess. Congress is in session 40 weeks a year, punctuated by district work periods and state work periods where they go home. But here in Washington, their families were able to make friends. They were able to talk to one another outside of work. They would look at, rather than going after one another on the dais, they would look at how do we ask the witnesses questions? How can we get together to make sure we get the most effective and efficient government that our legislation can help produce? And so, in absence of that, like the rest of the world, we've become siloed. In fact, there aren't that many opportunities for members of Congress to engage with one another except on the floor. Often in the tunnels where they go to walk and vote, they're busy, so they're on the phone or they're responding to emails, and there just really isn't the time to get to know one another. And Dr. King said this wonderful phrase is, if people fail to get along because they fear each other, they fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. So the work that we do doesn't focus on policy-related issues, really focuses on shared values as Americans and as human beings. When you get to know someone deeply and personally, you're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're less likely to take the bait in a heated situation, and more likely to work together for some kind of agreement, even if you're diametrically opposed on issues.
Well, and we used to see that so often, is members of Congress on both sides of the aisle coming together around issues like veterans policy, defense-related issues. I mean, we would see, bills get passed almost unanimous out of the House and even the Senate in terms of some of those issues. And that's rare these days because we probably don't have those same conversations as you're talking about. I know the Faith and Politics Institute works hard to bring these members together around a conversation. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like. How are you able to bring members together, and what do you discuss, and how do you get people talking again?
So when we do our monthly forums, what we're looking at is bringing speakers in who don't speak at the members, but who speak with them. And so we might have people who think differently about solving the big problems. So for instance, in looking at the othering of the poor, seeing the poor as different from you and me instead of as a fellow human being in need of attention and assistance. So we brought in John A. Powell, who's head of the Berkeley's Law Haas Center for a Fair and Inclusive Society, along with Arthur Brooks, who then was president of the American Enterprise Institute. They may have different ways to attack the issue of poverty, but together the end result is the same. They're going after the same thing. And so in a conversation with members there, they can talk and bounce ideas off of one another, hear one another's views, and most importantly, John and Arthur are personal friends. And so it makes the conversation easier and better when you have disagreement, but you're able to disagree without being disagreeable. And so we brought in J.D. Vance, who was the author of Hillbilly Elegy, very popular book a few years ago, with Jeff Johnson, who's a commentator for BET. One's from Appalachia in Ohio, and the other one is from urban Cleveland. And they talked about the problems of drugs and loneliness and employment and the dignity of work, and how in the two communities they're the same. And so members were able to come together around that, listen and engage with those thought leaders, and get some insights from one another in the process.
That's incredible. And I know you lead also meditation groups each week. Is that correct? Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
So the goal with these small groups, and we have been doing them over the course of 30 years. It was really the foundation of our work at Faith and Politics. It was to bring writings of major theologians, to focus on shared values within the then Judeo-Christian tradition, which was predominant in the Congress, and Dr. King's legacy, the Southern Freedom Movement, authors that had insights in that, and then, of course, poetry. So when I would begin a reflection, we would come together and have some niceties in the beginning, catch up on where we are as people, and then just calmly center ourselves a little bit, be with one another, present in this space. Mm-hmm. And then I might have something like a poem. Mm-hmm. So the 14th century Sufi mystic Hafiz has a poem, Integrity. Mm. And it goes, few have the courage to be a real hero, that rare man or woman who always keeps their word. Even an angel needs rest. Integrity creates a body so vast that 1,000 winged ones will plead, may I lay my cheek against you. Mm. And then we might see how that speaks to me in terms of my own personal integrity, what I want to bring in my leadership skills to the people that I serve. What do I want to take in my week where it's going to help me get through better and stronger and really the most productive way that we can act in the week.
And sharing those moments of humanity, really, together, I'm sure is an incredibly powerful way for members of Congress and even anyone in communities to find something that they share, that they have in common. And it's always much easier to talk about the things that you don't have in common when you first recognize the things that you do. Have you found that to be the case?
Yes, and I think, only by coming together week after week do we get to know one another. And these are conversations that wouldn't happen otherwise, because you wouldn't have that hour of dedicated time to think and reflect. And to be honest with you, when you look at thinking and reflecting in a busy day, that drops to kind of the bottom of your priority list, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And I love how you said democracy is a conversation. And it's a conversation that not only our members of Congress need to have, but that we all need to have. Please stay with us. More to come. We'll be right back.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Dad.
See ya, dude. See ya. You got me and your well.
Nice life. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about rigged out fight. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover, and we're continuing our conversation this evening with Joan Mooney, who's the president and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute. And Joan, when we were finishing the last segment, we were talking about the incredible ways that faith and politics really brings people together and facilitates important conversations about issues that our country is facing. Can you tell us a little bit about what Faith and Politics mission is and what its principles are rooted in the organization?
Well, I would say for us historically, we began as an interfaith ministry on Capitol Hill with a focus on racial justice. So the founder, Doug Tanner, was involved in a campaign in North Carolina, and he did not understand and he did not like race being used as a wedge issue, as a division. And so when he founded the Faith and Politics Institute, it was really to get into some of the tough issues that as a nation we don't look at or that are politically capitalized on. And so the foundations of the organization were really rooted in Dr. Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolence. As we know, Dr. King was one of the leaders of the only nonviolent revolution in our history, without firing a shot and with a force more powerful than any military. His audacious love really changed the course of history for the nation and indeed the world. And so in looking at those 6 principles of nonviolence that Dr. King held up and that came in his first book, Stride to Freedom, Towards Freedom. The first one is nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. It's easy to respond negatively and to jab back, but it is very hard to resist that and to respond to hate with love. Second, nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. It seeks not to demonize an enemy, but to win them over to seeing things from your perspective. It's looking at redemption and reconciliation.
So when you're talking about these principles of nonviolence, I mean, that has been such a powerful force in our country. The work that Dr. King started, and I hope the work that we all continue on to ensure that our country reaches the greatness is incredibly important to where we are right now. And so I think when you're going through these principles, it's amazing to see how prevalent and how meaningful they still are today.
Yes, and they're still hard, but they were just as hard then. So if you think about one political side saying to the other, we never fight back, or it's them, you think about how brave this really was then as now. Then under physical threat,
right,
under threat of life and limb. So, and that's why it's important to note that the King philosophy focuses on the source of the evil, not the person. It doesn't seek to demonize opponents. It seeks to understand them, to redeem them, and win them over. So Dr. King was about redeeming the soul of America, and that's most important for all of us, because we think of politics as kind of this zero-sum game, but that wasn't Dr. King's vision. Dr. King's vision was of a beloved community, and that is not a soft thing. That's a really muscular thing. That is hard when you disagree with someone and you want things your way and you want total control. And so this philosophy of nonviolence in the realm of politics is hard, because we want to win always, and our view is the right view and probably the only view, right? And the other person thinks their view is the right view and the only view. But when we have a conversation together, we're able to find out things that we don't know about one another, and we're not acquainted enough with one another to make those judgments.
Well, we talked a little bit about principle 1 being nonviolence, and 2 was seeking to make friendships and finding that understanding. Tell us a little bit more about the other principles.
So we're looking at defeating the roots of evil and not the people who might be doing bad things. So in other words, I think what we're looking to do is seeking to win people over to gain some mutual understanding. And that's hard, because when you get attacked politically, your first desire is to fight back and to punch back. That would be a reasonable reaction for a human being to see and understand. But the more reasoned response is to respond and to try to find what's good in the other person, not to seek to humiliate them, but to seek to find the good in them.
Do you think, by really basing the organization's philosophies in Dr. King's principles of nonviolence, do you feel like that has been able to give you the platform to bring people from all different walks of life together, from different states, from different political parties? Has that really helped the organization set a firm foundation to be able to do the important work?
Well, one of the things that we do is bring members of Congress, over 300 of them over the organization's history, down to Alabama to retrace the footsteps of the civil rights movement with our board chair emeritus, Congressman John Lewis. And no matter where someone is from the country, no matter what their political perspective, when they come on that journey, they see why Dr. King's strategy was the way it was, how he sought to win people over that were and in some cases are intransigent about their viewpoints on things. And he was able, with that audacious love, to break down the mightiest of walls of oppression and alienation and segregation.
Well, and I love how he talks about love is action, right? Love causes change. And if we love more and more, that change will occur. Can you talk about a little bit more on that change and how that love does drive social change?
Well, I think that in general, when you respond in a way that opens a door rather than closes a door, you have room to gain, right? So Dr. King and his followers and the youth in SNCC and elsewhere that were trained by Jim Lawson in nonviolent protest under the teachings of Gandhi, looked at it as seeking to win somebody over, so leaving a door open. If they did not respond in kind, that would change the outcome. And indeed, it was the only thing that really did. Many people put their lives on the line in this nonviolent way, were willing to sacrifice their very lives in nonviolent protests to achieve the changes that they achieved in the 1960s.
And those changes, many of them still need to occur today. I mean, we're still living in a country where this work is not complete, right? That we continue to needing to break down these racial barriers, needing to find situations where we create more equity. Can you talk about how the principles of nonviolence can apply to even the work we have left to do today?
Well, we have a lot of work to do in the 400 years that in the 400 years we have had slavery, an evolution of slavery through Jim Crow laws to mass incarceration to where we are today with structural racism. And it is going to take people learning and being open to understand whether or not your family came over in the Revolution. They came with waves of European immigrants or immigrants from Central and South America, or you came today. This is a legacy that we all need to face as Americans. It is our original sin. And while we have made some good changes, if you look at where we are today as a nation with regard to housing and equal opportunity, we are a long way. We have come a long way, but we do have a long way to go still.
And that's what I think is so important, is as we celebrate the life of Dr. King today and we learn more about the principles of nonviolence, and I think understanding too how hard it really was and it will continue to be, and how ways that we can use those principles to further our country, to further ensure that every man and woman are really created equal and have equal opportunities. I mean, I think that's really important as we continue to remember the life and legacy of Dr. King, especially today. And I know we had many families out doing service projects because today is also a day of service. Can you talk a little bit about why that service is so important in ensuring that we honor Dr. King's legacy?
So, for us at Faith and Politics, a lot of what our work that brings us together is service. It's thinking outside yourself. How can I put what I believe in politics into action? We can talk about things. We can put up a photograph on our Facebook or Instagram, but in the end, where the rubber hits the road is what we do with the time we have. And so it's important to have this one day of service, but it is one day. We should look at carrying on service throughout the course of the year and make it a part of our life rather than just one holiday.
Absolutely, I love that. Making service a part of our everyday lives rather than just making it one day. Well, please stay with us. We'll be right back as we continue the conversation with Joan Mooney.
There. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy. What do you call a pig that knows karate? Pork chop. Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Can I tell you another one? So how does a tissue dance? Put a little boogie on it. What's Beethoven's favorite fruit? Banana. What is a boxer's favorite drink? Fruit punch.
Mom, I got it. What are you doing in there?
I got stuck.
Are you a dog?
I wouldn't do that. Have you seen the pliers? Where'd you find those?
It's not your birthday.
Sorry.
Bye, Grandpa.
Bye, Grandpa.
Take care of yourself.
What are you doing? What are you looking for?
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover. And tonight we're continuing our conversation with Joan Mooney, the president and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute. And Joan, as we left last segment, we were really talking about Dr. King's principles of nonviolence. And you referenced the pilgrimage that the Faith and Politics Institute takes members of Congress on. Tell us a little bit more about that pilgrimage, because I think so many of our viewers are probably very familiar with that particular pilgrimage.
So the Faith and Politics Institute since 1998 has nearly every year been taking large groups of members of Congress, their families, and other political leaders, including presidents, to retrace the footsteps of the civil rights movement throughout the American South. The place that we go the most, because it really is ground zero in what was known as the Southern Freedom Movement, is Alabama. So we go to Birmingham, Montgomery, and of course Selma, Alabama. We're going to head there this year. The very first pilgrimage was in 1998. It was a small group of members, less than a dozen of them, the chair of the Republican National Committee and the chair of the Democratic National Committee. We had Congressman John Lewis, Democrat from Georgia, of course, civil rights icon. We had wonderful Republican Amo Houghton from upstate New York, from Corning, New York. And the two of them were co-chairs of the Institute at that point in time, and we brought together Republicans and Democrats to learn the history that would hopefully inform their politics and their viewpoint. And so the very first time it was small, and they were able to engage with one another. It was the Jubilee celebration in honor of all those foot soldiers who'd walked from Selma to Montgomery back in 1965, and who Congressman Lewis was beaten within an inch of his life, as were many others, at the end of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, intending to walk their way to Montgomery to protest for the governor for the right to vote. At that time, in counties throughout Alabama, while the population of blacks was greater than whites at that time, no blacks were registered to vote. And so Congressman Lewis takes his colleagues there in order to not only just learn the history, but to learn of the conscience, courage, and compassion that was required for them to summon up the strength to knock down those walls of oppression that they faced. And so we've been to Farmville, Virginia, and the story of the school system shutting down there for a number of years, Tennessee, to Memphis and Nashville, home of the lunch counter sit-ins. Memphis, of course, that's where Dr. King was assassinated when he went down to go help the sanitation workers with their strike in Memphis in 1968. We've been to Charleston, which you joined us on. We've been to Columbia, Orangeburg, and Charleston in the wake of the horrific shooting at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. And we talked with the survivors and family members and wanted to learn how they were able to forgive in the midst of such hate. And again, we see Dr. King's legacy coming out, love and not hate. And Jesus' teachings, love and not hate.
That is incredible. I mean, remembering when the survivors forgave in that situation. I mean, it was a moment in our history where they taught our entire country a lesson. And I think, as you said, just building upon Dr. King's principles of nonviolence and making love an action. We saw that so well with those survivors that chose to forgive that day.
Yes, and 1 year ago today, I brought Miss Polly Shepard, who survived the massacre and was in the room, up to Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue to meet with the congregations there, to help them, to talk with them, to minister to them, and to give them the sense that their lives would go on as hers had gone on, while that moment was so raw for them. And then the congregants from Pittsburgh went down and visited Charleston. So the ripple effect of this work that we do is really been touched by God.
Mm-hmm. And it is so much of healing, right? Healing not only people that are directly affected, but healing the country in so many ways. And the conversations that you all have on these pilgrimage and the experiences that people have are life-changing. I remember for me personally, walking across Edmund Pettus Bridge with Congressman John Lewis leading us was both an incredible spiritual journey for me, as well as you saw a man who, as you said, had been beaten and left for dead, decide to continue that march and everything that he does, not only ceremonial in that and march in Selma each year with the pilgrimage, but he continues to march on every issue that he champions.
Sure, and I think Congressman Lewis has brought people down there to open up their minds and hearts. I've had members of Congress say, I can't believe it's taken me all this time to learn that slavery didn't end at the Civil War. Mm. And while that might seem obvious to you and me, it's not obvious to everyone. So this experience helps open people's minds to not only our history, but our present day, where we are now. And, we have a lot of reminders around us, but really takes that deep, immersive experience of an entire weekend. I think almost everybody who has been on these journeys has said it was their most transformative experience in their lifetime, let alone their experience in Congress. Just as members of Congress who are involved in our reflection groups will say, that hour of the week is an oasis, and it grounds them in their work. This helps them in ways and other ways. And for instance, I could add, we've been to pilgrimages in Northern California to look at Chinese and Japanese American immigration and their immigration experience. We acknowledged the anniversary of Japanese internment, where American citizens were driven to remote parts of the country and interned in essentially concentration camps for long periods of time, with resident aliens as well who were in the country with documentation. It's shocking now when we think about it, but then we see things come up in the present day that are not too far off that. We look at our immigration law over our entire history we've had the same issues come up time after time, just like we have with regard to race.
And I think it speaks to something you said earlier. It's so important to really learn our past and our history, because that is the best way to inform our decisions moving forward. And talk a little bit about how you use history, how you use the things that happen in our nation's past to better inform our decision makers as they move forward.
Well, I think history puts a little bit of a barrier to a little bit of a buffer to the present day. So it's easier to look back in situations because they're not as fresh, and to be a little more objective, so that people who come at an issue from either side can look at it honestly, but then they also see the cycles of American history and world history and how these issues keep coming up. And they're really human issues, right? Mm-hmm. We're all part of the human race, one big community, but we have trouble getting along. So we have these constant conversations here that, how did this happen? And then you'll see photographs of angry people. This year, on this year's pilgrimage, we're going to have Ruby Bridges, who is part of that iconic Norman Rockwell painting, sure. The Problem We All Live With. Mm-hmm. And she integrated the school as a young girl. Tiny little thing, absolutely adorable, walking up to the school steps and people spitting on her, yelling with signs. And we think, oh my gosh, that was horrific then. But then we look now and we see how we're treating one another, sometimes in politics. It's not that far off that. Right. And it's helpful to see within the course of history that things have changed a little, but there is still human nature. And that's part of the work. The reason why we keep going down there, why we keep doing these weekend events, the monthly and the biweekly and weekly reflections, is if you don't pay attention to it daily, pretty soon it won't be a priority. So it is that task, that habit of reinforcing our mindsets. Once in a lifetime pilgrimages are amazing, but it's really that daily work at the forge where we're going to get results.
And to think about the courage that it took with a small little girl, I mean, that's inspiring to all of us. I mean, if a small little girl can have that much courage, right? I mean, just think if we embodied that inspiration, the changes that we could make in our country and in our communities each and every day.
Yes, and I think that's what's so unusual about the American freedom movement, as the civil rights icons would call it, because it wasn't really about civility for them. It was about everybody being treated equally and for freedom and justice for all. I think the way they look at it is it's a necessary thing to do, that without it, change would never have happened.
Right. Well, please stay with us. We're going to continue our conversation with Joan Mooney and talk about where we go from here. How do we get to a better place? Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
I surrender.
All right, pal. Get ready for the day, buddy.
Hey, Dad. Hey, Dad. Do we have a gun?
What's that?
Do we have a gun?
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
I tried Oxy at a couple of parties. I thought I had it under control. I didn't know it'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. What to expect when you're expecting.
Like here.
A teenager.
Today, I'm going to show you how to teen-proof your home. First step, hide the car keys. Preferably somewhere they would never look. Challenges will come up. Be ready for them. Hi, honey.
Ready for the... Mom, you don't use mannequins in the mannequin challenge.
You don't have to know it all to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover. And we're continuing our conversation with Joan Mooney, the president and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute. And Joan, as we were finishing the last segment, you were talking about how powerful so many of the historical lessons that you're able to experience on these pilgrimages are for people. They're transformative in so many ways. And you talked a little bit about, yes, these moments are important, but it's also really important what happens afterwards. Mm-hmm. So where do we go from there? Where do we go as we move forward?
I think as a nation, we have to learn to go against the grain of siloing ourselves to only people who think and act like us. It's going to be uncomfortable, but we need to learn how to get proximate with difference, with people who think differently, who act differently, who may come from different places. This is a melting pot, e pluribus unum, out of many one. We don't have to assimilate, but we do all have to get along together. We weave together a rich tapestry with all of our differences, but the only way we learn that is if you look on your Facebook feed and everyone thinks like you don't have a broad enough repertoire to be a good citizen. You've got to learn other people's viewpoints. You've got to reach out to people who are different than you. Otherwise, we're going to be in the stalemate and fighting forever.
Mm-hmm. That discomfort, too, that you talked about, that's really where the growth and the change occur, right? It is that place of discomfort. It's where those conversations start. It's where those relationships begin, and how important it is for us to really force ourselves to get into those discomfortable places.
Well, after, Dr. King would say, after negotiation and everything, you get into direct action, which is really creating a creative tension to engage with one another when everything may be at a stalemate.
Well, one of the things, and you've talked quite a bit about Congressman John Lewis, and I know he has a prominent role in your organization. But one of the things I love when I hear John Lewis talk about good trouble, can you explain a little bit about good trouble and what that means and why good trouble is important right now?
Well, I think too often, and Dr. King said this in his letter from a Birmingham jail and throughout his speeches, is worse than an opponent is a lukewarm friend who isn't there when you really need them there. John Lewis talks about when you see something that's wrong, speak up, speak out, work to change it, don't let it pass. If we're all in this together, pointing out what we need to do to become a more perfect union, then it will become perfected then. So when he talks about good trouble, necessary trouble, he talks about his parents told him, stay out of trouble, but he saw things that were not right, and he has worked his whole life to make things right. And so that is getting into good trouble, necessary trouble.
Yes. Well, in good trouble, we need that right now. Because one of the things Dr. King said that was so incredibly powerful is injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think that really speaks to the importance of speaking up and speaking out and getting into that good trouble when you see there's something that needs to change in your community and also in your country.
Well, when you look at the history and we think about Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama, you think about then Dr. King going down and ultimately issuing a call to action to the nation for people to come down. People of varying faiths, clergy members, people from all across the nation, indeed across the world, came to join the march. So when you see something, say something, and that is what will draw attention and get change for it.
What are some of the things that our viewers that are tuning in this evening or will watch the show later on, what are some of the things that we can all do to help create the necessary change needed in our communities and our country right now?
It really is as simple as being open and engaged with other people and in not giving up. I think we talked about democracy being a conversation, right? Well, a conversation is more than two intersecting monologues. If I'm listening to you only to be able to reply rather than to seek to understand, then we really haven't had a conversation. I haven't come to understand what your viewpoint is. Listening is the most undervalued skill. We're quick to issue our viewpoint and command control of a conversation. And we're slow to listen and to allow somebody else to have control. But if you go back to Dr. King's principle of nonviolence, it's to do research on your opponent, to get to know how they feel and what they think, and then how your views, you might be able to find some common ground there. So look for the good that comes out of someone else. Try to emphasize the positive, the good, and then work to build from there.
So it's as simple as starting these conversations, and as you said, not just starting them, but continuing that dialogue and continuing that quest for understanding as we move forward.
Sure, and I talked about some of the work that we do. We do work with congressional staff as well. And over time, people don't know each other at the staff level either, and they may get in their Democratic or Republican silo or only with their delegation. And so we try to do work that brings people together through service projects. If you have a habit and you stay in a rut, that is where you will be. But we all need to broaden our horizons. We need to get out in the world and see what's going on in it, get to know people better, and be open and listen. Seek to understand first before being understood.
I mean, it's incredible how the principles of nonviolence that I know are rooted in your organization and were put forth by Dr. King really apply so much right now. I mean, in a time, we talked about this in the first segment, that our country is so polarized and so divided. I mean, if ever there was a moment when we needed to adhere and utilize these principles, now is the time.
Yes, and I think one of the principles refers to checking your own motives. So it is easy to say that the opponent won't listen or the opponent doesn't understand, but they're saying the same thing about you. And so to sit down and have a conversation and to try to engage. You know, Dr. King's nonviolent philosophy and his 6 principles for social change, they're really good debate tactics. I mean, if you were on a debating team, you had to learn a position, you had to be able to argue it and articulate it as if it was your position yourself. And so getting to know where other people are coming from different viewpoints, it will help bridge the divides. I'm not saying to change your viewpoint or that a viewpoint is wrong, but at some point, this is what we know. We live in a democracy. We have a 2-party system that by nature is divisive. Diversity is by nature divisive. So it takes us kind of going against the grain and really paying attention to it so we're able to bridge divides and live in peace together and pull in the same direction moving forward.
That's really what it boils down to, is coming to a place where our country can come together again and ensure that we can work together as we move forward, that things aren't so partisan and so divided because of our news silos or political parties, but we're finding issues that we can really come together on. And that's the place to start, is finding some common ground and then being able to move forward.
And it usually happens when we get in a crisis, right? When in a crisis, everybody calms down. But it's important to look at, we talked about the reflections, and one of the recent character strengths that we reflected on was perspective. And we talked about planting a hickory tree. When does a hickory tree bear fruit? In about 200 to 250 years.
Wow.
That gives you a sense how long the arc of history is. It's not a straight bend. We have to keep tugging on it. You and I served together in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Those decisions that we make as a nation matter. At one point, under the administration of Barack Obama, he was caring for the children of a Civil War veteran. So the decisions from Abraham Lincoln were being executed today. The decisions that we all make as a nation in this democracy, our leaders and our citizens, will be bearing fruit many, many years to come, centuries to come, in fact.
And that's important to keep in mind, is being patient and never giving up, right? Never giving up at perfecting our democracy and perfecting our country and the opportunities and the equality that we have to ensure. Tell us a little bit about where our viewers can go to find out more about faith and politics.
You can come and look at our website. We are at www.faithandpolitics.org. We also have a Facebook page. We are on Twitter and Instagram as well. And this year's pilgrimage is focused on aspirations of youth, then and now. It will be March 6th through 8th in Alabama. We'll be privileged to join Brian Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and visionary for both the Legacy Museum and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, known as the Lynching Memorial. We'll be joined by a number of civil rights icons. We are also learning the history of all the civil rights cases. It will be absolutely wonderful, so stay tuned.
Well, thank you, Joan, for being with us this evening, and thank you for tuning in. And we will leave with a Dr. King quote: "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Thank you for joining us. Good night.